This is the most concrete essay that I have seen a major AI lab put out. Anthropic is panicking. They present only two scenarios for the future of AI. And in this video, I am going to review this essay in full and show you why what they're saying is so important. And if you like seeing me cover new articles like this, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel. It really does help the channel, and thank you in advance. And by the way, this entire video is brought to you by Here.now. More on them in a minute. This article starts with such a strong statement. 2028, two scenarios for global AI leadership. And it's going to become clear why they specifically called out the 2028 date as I go through this paper. It's essential that the US and its allies stay ahead of authoritarian governments like the Chinese Communist Party or CCP. They minced no words. They are specifically saying it is of utmost importance that the United States and its allies stay ahead of China in the race for artificial intelligence. So before we get into this, I know a lot of you watch from throughout the entire world, and I just want to acknowledge my perspective comes from being born in America. So with that, let's get into the paper. AI will soon become powerful enough to be used to repress citizens at unprecedented scale and even to alter the balance of power among nations. And since AI is advancing more quickly by the day, we have only a limited period of time to set the conditions of the competition and determine whether and how those threats materialize. It's with this in mind that we outline what's required to ensure America stays ahead. So once again, not mincing any words, of course, this American enterprise wants America to win. Okay, so as I go through this, I believe Anthropic actually nailed a lot of their arguments. In fact, their identification of risk to America's dominance in artificial intelligence was spot on in almost every way. The part where I really diverge from Anthropic's point is the solutions to the problem. And so I'm going to tell you my thoughts as we go through this. The most important ingredient for developing AI is access to the computer chips on which the models are trained. So they're saying more so than the data, more so than the researchers, more so than anything else, the actual chips, the part that they don't really control themselves, is the most important part. So think NVIDIA, Google with their TPUs, AWS with Trainium, and Anthropic and OpenAI, the two leading AI model companies, have no silicon themselves. They only buy and rent from others. Since the most capable chips are developed by American companies, the US government currently limits China's supply by enforcing tight export controls on them. And this is already where there is a huge divergence in opinion between US companies on whether export controls are good or bad, whether they're working, whether there are just too many loopholes and they're not really working at all. And it's just so interesting to see such a strong stance and such an opposite stance from NVIDIA in particular. Recent history suggests these controls have been incredibly successful. Okay, we're going to get into that. In fact, AI labs in China have only built models close in intelligence to America's because of their talent, their knack for exploiting loopholes around these export controls, and their large-scale distillation attacks that illicitly extract the innovations of American companies. So first, because of China's talent, there's a clip in which Jensen says,
50% of the world's AI researchers are Chinese.
So we already know China and the Chinese people more broadly are incredibly good at AI research. Then on top of that, their knack for exploiting loopholes around these export controls. We've heard lots of both rumors as well as proven stories about smuggling chips from one country to another, using proxies to get inference and compute on chips that China is not supposed to have access to. We've heard it all already. So they are definitely doing this. And their large-scale distillation attacks that illicitly extract the innovations of American companies. Now, this one's very interesting. Anthropic is linking to their own report about Chinese distillation attacks. But what's interesting is I don't know if it's actually considered large scale. In fact, many people countered a lot of these findings with, no, this is actually relatively small on the scale of distillation attacks. In fact, DeepSeek was on the very small side, and there could be a justification of we were just running competitive benchmarks against competing models. And if you're not familiar with what distillation is, it means taking a big model, getting it to answer questions, and that data gets used to feed into a smaller model to make that smaller model really good, but at a fraction of the cost and size. And by the way, if you're watching this video, I know that you are deep in artificial intelligence. And if you want to try out one of the coolest agentic products I have ever seen, check out the sponsor of today's video. Here.now is one of those products where once you see it, it just becomes so obvious what the future will look like. Here.now is web hosting for agents. If you ever need your agent to publish anything, which is all the time for me, whether I'm sharing documents with my team or I need to send something to another agent, I always need to publish. I literally just tell my agents, publish this to here.now. It's free and you don't even need an account to use it. And the best part, it is agent native. And that is what makes it so special. And it works with any agent, Claude Code, OpenClaw, Cursor, Codex, any of them. Go to here.now, copy the setup instructions, and install it. And you're done. That's it. You now have instant publishing for your agent. And they just added private storage as well. So if you don't want to publish something publicly, simply tell your agent, go store it. And it will. And that's it. You can access it from anywhere. It is private to you and your agent. And the best part is there's no interface. It is all done through whatever agent you're using. I am a massive fan of here.now. I use it with all of my agents. I highly recommend checking it out. Thanks to here.now for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the video. So then they go on to describe two scenarios for what 2028 will look like. So they don't explicitly say why they keep talking about 2028, why that year, but I have a very good idea. One, it's probably just the right amount of time for the US to either sustain and solidify its lead or China officially catches up. But what I actually think is more likely is that we're going to have self-improving artificial intelligence by 2028. And whoever hits self-improving AI first essentially just wins. And this is different from what Anthropic says in this paper. I'll get more into that in a moment. Okay, so two scenarios. In the first scenario, America has successfully defended its compute advantage. Policymakers have acted to tighten export controls further, disrupt China's distillation attacks, and further accelerate democracy's adoption of AI. These are all very aspirational and good things for us. In this world, democracies set the rules and norms around AI. It's also in this scenario that we're most likely to successfully engage with China on safety, which we're supportive to the extent this is possible. Now, let me tell you when it's the easiest to negotiate with somebody, when you have leverage, okay? It's very difficult, almost impossible to negotiate with somebody when they have all the power. And that's essentially what Anthropic just said. They said, hey, we'll be able to negotiate with China on AI safety if we have the most powerful AI models. Sure. And we will also be able to dictate what those policies are because we do have the most powerful models. But there is a second scenario. In this second scenario, America has chosen not to act. Now, this is important how they're saying this because this is basically framing their solution to the problems as the only solution. And of course, I don't like that, and I disagree with their solutions, but again, we'll get back to that in a little bit. Policymakers have not tightened loopholes on the CCP's access to compute, and AI firms in China have quickly taken advantage, catching up to the frontier and even overtaking America. In this world, AI norms and rules are shaped by authoritarian regimes, and the best AI models enable automated repression at scale. It will be no solace that this authoritarian triumph has happened on the back of American compute. So basically what they're saying is that since America has basically invented all of these technologies around AI, and then we're shipping China all of our hardware, all of our chips, and then they're able to catch up, and we no longer come into the negotiation from a position of power and leverage, we're probably going to be kicking ourselves. America and its allies approach AI competition from a position of great strength. The tools for AI dominance have been built by an exceptionally innovative ecosystem of companies and democratic nations. Our past success means that our present task is largely to avoid squandering our advantage. Basically, we can only mess it up at this point. We have a lead. We have a decisive lead. It is our game to lose. Now they go into more detail about the two different scenarios. Democracies currently hold a substantial lead in compute, the most important ingredient for developing frontier AI models. There's a lot of duplicate language here, so I'm going to skip over some of it. They start by saying, we have the best chips, we being America and its allies. But on model intelligence, AI labs in the People's Republic of China, PRC, under the jurisdiction and control of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, are not far behind. We know that. The open source models coming out of China are extremely capable. They're not frontier, but they're probably about 6 to 9 months behind what our public frontier is. We focus on the CCP as it is the regime that is most able to use frontier AI to cement authoritarianism. We do not seek to undermine the interests or ingenuity of the Chinese people. That is key. To make it clear, when I talk about America versus China, I am making a clear distinction between the Chinese government and the Chinese citizens. They are very distinct. Already, the CCP is using AI to censor speech, repress dissidents, hack governments and corporations across the world, and strengthen the People's Liberation Army, the PLA. And yes, they've not only been doing this recently, they've been doing it for many, many years. The amount of mass surveillance going on in China is truly stunning. And in fact, a lot of their early work in artificial intelligence, the reason why they weren't at the frontier with us while we were discovering it was because they spent so much time and research investment into technology and AI for mass surveillance, facial recognition, and the like. AI labs in China have world-class talent. This is true. When you read some of these papers, especially from the DeepSeek team, some of the innovations, some of the algorithmic unlocks that they've been able to achieve under such heavy constraint is beyond impressive. So they have the talent. There is no argument against that. And I know I can hear the video comments already. The United States does surveillance, and yes, I am not naive to think that the US government is perfect and doesn't do some of these things. But overall, I believe in representative democracies as a way to curb some of those bad habits, whereas the authoritarian regime in China does not. Continuing, it is compute constraints that limit their ability to keep up. But this is temporary. Okay, this is temporary. The compute constraints only mean that they will scramble to develop their own chip ecosystem, which they are already doing and is a big part of what I disagree with based on this Anthropic essay. Labs in China have remained close by exploiting loopholes in US export control policies and by carrying out large-scale distillation attacks that harvest the innovations of US models in order to mimic their capabilities. Now, I am not saying that the Chinese model companies are not doing distillation attacks, but I'm not 100% convinced that the scale of these attacks are enough to keep China right on our tail on model innovations. I really do think a lot of the reason why they're just right behind us is because of their innovations on the algorithm side and just their raw talent, their raw human talent. So the paper goes on to explain how AI is accelerating, the amount of compute we need is accelerating, and thus right now is when we need to make policy decisions to try to solidify that lead for the foreseeable future. To date, by allowing export control, evasions, and distillation attacks. Now, who is allowing it? I don't think anybody is explicitly allowing it. I know that Anthropic is actively trying to prevent distillation attacks, and so is every other major AI lab. And we do have laws in place, we have export controls in place, and so if China is getting the chips anyways, it's not because we wanted them to. And just to clarify this point, I don't think the United States is somehow looking the other way and allowing China to get the chips that we do have export controls on, or that somehow we're doing this to ourselves. I just don't believe that. And that is the sense that I'm getting Anthropic believes by reading this paper. Many in Congress and the Trump administration have championed export controls, curbing distillation attacks, and exporting American AI. In advancing these policies, we are hopeful that democracies can secure a commanding lead by 2028 and avoid a destabilizing neck-and-neck race with the CCP 2 years from now. Now, here's the important part. The political systems in which the most advanced AI is created will shape the rules and norms for how the technology is developed and deployed. This is incredibly important. If you are the leader in AI technology, you get to dictate how it's deployed, how it's used, and really, you have the ultimate leverage. And that's from a geopolitical point of view. AI is the most important technology we have ever created, and whoever's in control of it is basically the decision maker on the world stage. Now, here's a few interesting bits from this essay. They specifically highlight how AI under an authoritarian regime can be more harmful than anything we've seen previously in history. Historically, the reach of authoritarian rule has been limited by its dependence on human enforcers to carry out surveillance and repression. But powerful AI systems may remove that dependency, enabling automated repression on a far greater scale. For that reason, the prospect of the CCP leading in AI is among the greatest threats to a successful transition. The technology of artificial intelligence is very much a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allows every human to be orders of magnitude more productive, and our efficiency in different technologies to be optimized beyond our wildest imaginations. But at the same time, that exact leverage can be applied to mass surveillance and enforcement. So that's what they're pointing out, and I could not agree more. And China is the only country besides the US with well-resourced, highly talented AI labs chasing the frontier. They being CCP, is highly motivated to establish China as the leading AI power. And if you think somehow we should all just get along, the world doesn't work that way. Everybody has different views, and everybody wants to implement and enforce their views on the rest of the world. And so obviously I'm coming from a place of bias, being from America, and certainly China wants it to be their way in the world. And so any argument against the way that things are is just an argument against nature. Beijing has poured tens of billions of dollars into China's AI and semiconductor sectors. This is very important to note because basically the Chinese government gets to subsidize their artificial intelligence innovation. And in the US, we don't really do it that way. The government does not pick winners and losers for the most part. So they go on to talk about how the CCP is already using AI systems for censoring speech, enforcing draconian policies on ethnic minorities, and to hack major corporations and government agencies. Yes, the Chinese government has been hacking US enterprise companies, stealing our IP for many years. This is nothing new. But they go on, and Anthropic really, again, does not mince words. The CCP's vision of an AI-enabled techno-authoritarianism has been extensively documented, where state security agencies have systematically deployed facial recognition technology, biometric data collection, and communication surveillance, enabling repression at a scale that humans alone could not achieve. And then they go on to talk about the dual use of AI technology, something that I just mentioned a moment ago. But I want to point out a few things. The PLA is already procuring commercially developed Chinese AI systems for military use, including DeepSeek models deployed to coordinate swarms of unmanned vehicles and enable cyber offense capabilities. This is happening right now. And they hint at self-improving AI, although they don't explicitly talk about it in this essay. I do truly believe they named 2028 because that's probably when it's going to be happening, and then they hint at it here. Advanced AI models will be able to compress research and development cycles in semiconductors, biotech, and advanced materials. Basically, A lead in frontier AI will enable a widening lead across the full national security technology stack. This is it. This is the entire crux of the 2028 specific timeline argument. I do believe this. Maybe not the very exact date, but this is the race. And it's funny because they go on to contradict themselves a little bit, saying, and I'll read it in a moment in more detail, but basically the AI race is not truly a race in the sense that there's no finish line, but there definitely is a finish line. And that is self-improving AI. And now we get to hear them talk about Mythos. If a PRC AI lab had developed a model at the level of Claude Mythos Preview before an American one, the CCP would have had first access to a system that can autonomously discover and chain software vulnerabilities, which it could have used to further penetrate critical American infrastructure. And so, whether you believe it was a good idea or not, for Anthropic to talk about Mythos without actually releasing it, it is pretty clear that if the Chinese government had a Mythos level model, they would be using it for cyber offense. Future models will be exponentially more capable and therefore have commensurately greater implications for the national security interests of the US and other democracies. They go on to talk about if rather than us being, America and our allies having a very distinct lead over Chinese AI, it was a neck and neck race, it would be a very different story. Remember, I mentioned earlier, if you come to a negotiation from a position of power, you get to dictate the terms. And then there's the if both parties are equal scenario, let's talk about it. A neck and neck race between American and Chinese AI labs could make industry and government-led safety and governance efforts more difficult and less likely. If PRC labs are either close behind or at par with models in the US, private AI firms in the US and China are likely to feel more pressure to release new models and products faster without taking prudent pre-deployment safety measures. What they are saying is if Chinese AI labs and US AI labs are neck and neck in this race, they are at parity with their capabilities, they're going to be more willing to cut corners and push ahead and ignore safety concerns to basically solidify their lead. Now, this is very much in line with Anthropic's talking points. They are very much in the mindset that AI should be restricted to a few people. And yes, I am very against that. And they are very much about regulatory capture as well. So keep that in mind as you're hearing these words from the essay. And they go on to talk about how Chinese AI labs view AI safety versus how the US labs view safety. And specifically, they say, although there are increasing numbers of researchers in China, they are not as concerned with AI safety risks. As of last year, only 3 out of 13 top Chinese AI labs published any safety evaluation results. And one of the leading minds in large language models, Nathan Lambert, recently took a trip to China to visit all of the top AI labs. And I actually want to point out one thing he said, because it's very much in line with how they kind of culturally think about AI safety. And so listen to this. When asking questions on how they feel about the economics or long-term social risks of the models, far fewer Chinese researchers have sophisticated opinions and a drive to influence this. Their role is to build the best model. And so while in the United States, everybody is much more individualistic and much more vocal about their independent opinions, in China, it is not that way. It is, how can I contribute to my company to build the best model possible? And that is the only thing that they are thinking about. They also point out that the Chinese open source models are much more likely to disclose information that it shouldn't. The DeepSeek R1 model complied with 94% of overtly malicious requests under a common jailbreaking technique, compared with 8% for US reference models. Now, here's the thing, and this is actually very much in line with Anthropic's own argument against open source, which, once again, I will say I do not agree with. But once you get an open source model, you can strip it of any guardrails that you want. and you can get it to give you information about chemical and nuclear weapons. It's just a fact. And so, yes, that is quite a strong argument against open source. But here's the thing. You still need to have the resources, the will, the drive to actually take that information and do something with it. And if somebody really wanted to, all of this information is more or less available on the dark web, even the public web. It's all there anyways. Because remember, how were the models trained? They were trained on data from the internet. So this data exists. So the argument that, okay, open source means you can get it to tell you how to create a nuclear weapon is not a strong one, in my opinion. All right, and of course, they had to tout their Mythos model. So let's talk about that. Mythos Preview, a model that we released to select partners as part of Project Glasswing in April, signals the arrival of an acceleration period that makes policy action even more urgent. Now, for those of you who don't know what Project Glasswing is, or Mythos, it is their new model, a 10 trillion parameter model, the first of its kind, that was incredibly good at cyber. That basically means it's really good at discovering code vulnerabilities and hacking systems. And so they decided not to release it publicly. They chose a handful or two of companies to give it to directly, but basically they aren't releasing it publicly. But a lot of people thought that was two things. One, fear-based marketing, basically kind of drumming up interest in this kind of secretive, incredible model that nobody can actually get their hands on. And then number two, they really just didn't have enough compute to actually serve the model. They don't even have enough compute to serve their current models, let alone this massive model that they have, I guess, some kind of belief it's best not to release. And then they tie it back to their argument of restricting compute to China. It kind of does make sense. If China had a Mythos level model, they still wouldn't really have the compute necessary to run it successfully. But that doesn't mean they're not going to develop their own compute to do so. And they're not going to make that Mythos model 100, 1,000 times more efficient because of those constraints. So here's that important part I spoke about earlier. Calling that competition a race can give the false impression that there is a finish line, after which one side will conclusively secure victory. Rather, the competition will be an ongoing contest for advantage in which either democracies or authoritarian regimes successfully position themselves to shape the values, rules, and norms of an AI-enabled future. I do not agree. This is very much a race. Once we hit self-improving AI, that is AI that can make itself better at a rate that no human AI lab can do, that is the finish line. Because once that happens, the exponential gains in progress, in performance become so large that no one else can catch up. That is the power of recursive self-improvement. And of course, I have to reference this chart for like the 1,000th time in one of my videos. This is from the situational awareness paper. Basically, once we have automated AI research, we reach superintelligence shortly after. No one else can catch up, because think about how these two curves go. AI that is self-improving is accelerating so quickly that even if whoever comes in second gets to self-improving AI, it will not improve as fast as the leader. That is just it. That is the law of numbers. So next, Anthropic details what they call the 4 fronts of the competition, the AI competition. Number 1, intelligence. Which countries develop the most capable AI models? Number 2, domestic adoption. Which countries integrate the most effectively across commercial and public sectors? Number 3, global distribution. Which countries deploy the global AI stack on which the world economy runs? Number 2 and number 3 I've been talking about quite a bit lately. And 4, resilience. Which countries sustain political stability through the economic transition? Now, immediately, they say intelligence is the most important of the 4 fronts. And I disagree. This is a fundamental disagreement. Intelligence is very important, but the more likely scenario to happen is that China is able to develop very cheap, very efficient, and nearly as good open source models that get adopted by obviously themselves, but the United States, our allies, and globally. And that means the entire world is then built on Chinese AI technology. That also means they have incredible influence over the future of artificial intelligence. Model capabilities are also a primary driver of market adoption and global distribution. This is true up until a point. It turns out 99% of use cases are already accomplished with current model capabilities, both on the frontier and open source side. That means, as I said in a previous video, when a CEO is reviewing options for models and they see Opus or another Claude model at some expensive $30 per million output token rate versus a tenth of the cost for an open source model, $3 per million output tokens, that can do nearly, if not everything the frontier model can do for their specific use cases, what decision do you think they are going to make? And Anthropic says it explicitly. This I could not agree with more. Intelligence alone is not sufficient. If the CCP integrates near frontier AI systems quicker and more effectively into China's economy and the CCP security apparatus, and drives global adoption of subsidized, low-cost AI, then it could secure advantages over democracies that overcome an intelligence deficit. This is so important. They basically just contradicted themselves. They said, intelligence is the most important, but then again, if everybody's using a cheaper, more efficient version and is happy with it, then really intelligence doesn't matter as much. Kind of weird that they contradicted themselves 2 lines apart, but I agree with the latter. Next, they go on to talk about the state of competition between the US and China. Specifically, again, they hammered home the point they believe compute is the ultimate competitive advantage. Now, with that in mind, democracies are winning the competition for compute leadership today. While some worry that export controls could accelerate the CCP's own efforts to develop an advanced chip supply chain, little evidence suggests that China's indigenization efforts will challenge US and allied leadership in advanced compute technology. That is very different than what NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is saying right now.
The day that DeepSeek comes out on Huawei first, that is a horrible outcome for our nation.
Why is that? Because I mean, currently you can have a model like DeepSeek that can run on any accelerator. Why would that stop being the case in the future?
Well, suppose it doesn't. Suppose it optimized for Huawei. Suppose it's optimized for their architecture. It would put ours at a disadvantage.
They're already developing their own chips. Maybe they're not nearly as good as ours, but with all of the algorithmic unlocks in their models, with all of their incredible researchers and making pretty darn good chips and only getting better, that puts us in kind of a wonky place. That makes it so that the compute argument, compute being the most important thing we can restrict China from having, less valuable over time. Beijing has invested enormous resources into China's chip sector with major industrial policy initiatives like the Made in China 2025 strategy and the China Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, launched years before the imposition of export controls. Despite this state-backed investment, PRC AI labs and chip makers remain stymied by US and allied export controls on advanced chips and chip making equipment. Yes, they are behind, but not forever. And they have some data points to back up their argument. As a result, the compute gap appears to be widening. An analysis of Huawei and NVIDIA's roadmaps found that Huawei will produce just 4% of NVIDIA's aggregate compute in 2026 in total processing performance and 2% in 2027. And by the way, NVIDIA is not the only US company making chips. We have Google, we have Amazon. Obviously, we have AMD and Intel somewhere in the mix, but we have a lot of frontier chip firms. And it seems that Anthropic's strongest argument, at least in my opinion, for export controls is the fact that, further exacerbating their compute shortfalls, China has made little progress in many of the most technologically complex segments of the semiconductor supply chain, specifically extreme ultraviolet technology and deep ultraviolet technology. These are 2 parts, very sophisticated parts of the chip manufacturing process, and China cannot seem to solve it, cannot seem to figure out how to do it. And so if that's the case, allowing them to develop their own chip industry means eventually they're going to have to tackle the EUV and DUV, right? They need to solve those problems. So they might just be constrained for a very long time because these are such hard problems to solve. And thus, if we were to give them chips, if we were to sell them NVIDIA chips that we have solved these problems for, we're basically allowing them to catch up. That seems like a pretty valid argument in my mind. And they even call out China's inability to manufacture high bandwidth memory at scale. Again, the famous saying, constraint is the mother of invention, applies very well here. They might not be able to do it today, but soon they probably will. And so they specifically talk about that. Some observers worry that constraining access to compute will force AI labs in China to innovate on other axes, reducing the American lead. While PRC labs are innovating, these innovations are so far not sufficient to overcome their compute deficit. But again, this is a game of timing, not if, but when. And they actually have a strong argument here. Algorithmic improvements are both a function and a multiplier of compute, not a substitute for it. So, meaning discovering those advances is itself a compute-intensive process. More compute enables labs to run more experiments. They need the compute to unlock new algorithmic efficiency gains. And frontier models increasingly conduct AI R&D themselves. That loop will tighten further. Again, they didn't say self-improving AI, but that is what I believe they're kind of hinting at here with that 2028 date. Next, despite the attention paid to open weight models from China, their enterprise adoption lags closed frontier models, and monetization concerns have surfaced among public investors. This is important because I think Anthropic is being naive here. Just because the US frontier models are being adopted at a higher rate today, I'm telling you, a lot of the conversations that I'm having with leaders inside of companies, they're looking at their Anthropic bills, they're looking at their OpenAI bills, and they are thinking, what is happening? Yes, the value output from the investment in those tokens is there, and it's only increasing. But imagine you can get much of that value for 1/10 of the cost. And I'm referring to open source models, which are primarily coming from China today. So I think Anthropic is wrong in this assessment. And they also say AI labs in China seem to be moving away from open source, although not necessarily. Most Chinese AI labs are very much open source. And that's the strategy. When you're behind, when you have an inferior product, you have to release it either cheaper or for free. Now we come to their solutions. They have three main solutions. One, close the loophole, smuggled chips, foreign data center access, and SME. Today, PRC labs benefit from access to export-controlled American chips via smuggling and foreign data centers, and gaps in the SME controls accelerate their self-sufficiency efforts. So basically, they're saying it's too easy for China to get around our export controls, but we have the export controls in place. I guess we can just strengthen them? Fine. But to be honest, I'm still unsure if export controls are working or not. On the one hand, I think in the short run, they're very much working. But I think in the long run, it causes China to produce their own chip industry, which is obviously very detrimental to us. I want NVIDIA's chips, Google's chips, Amazon's chips to run the world. And so again, it's not a function of if China is going to solve these chip constraint problems, it is a function of when. And that's why I'm so unsure. Is it best to try to allow them to create their own industry by having strict export controls and just hope they're not able to do it for long enough that we solidify our dominance? That's certainly Anthropic's argument. But I think Jensen, on the flip side, is saying the opposite. No, they're well on their way to doing it. We might as well start getting in and becoming the platform that Chinese AI is built on. By the way, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Next, defend our innovations, restrict model access, and deter distillation attacks. Yeah, I have no argument against that. Obviously, like there's the meme that Anthropic stole data from the internet and now they're upset that everybody's stealing data from them. But look, let's move past that. They already have the model. We do not want Chinese companies using distillation attacks on US models. It just makes it easy for them to develop models that are at parity at a fraction of the investment to actually do so. And that really kind of kills the economics of AI development in the United States. And then finally, champion the export of American AI. Now, they do not believe in open source. This is my biggest disagreement and really frustration with Anthropic. They do not believe open source should be a thing. But to get the world to build on top of American artificial intelligence, it almost definitely needs to be in large part because of open source. Open source is cheaper. It tends to be more efficient. It tends to be more hardened. So I really do believe in open source. I really do believe to get enterprises both in the United States and worldwide to build on top of American AI, it has to at least in major part be open source models. And so while I agree with much of their identification of the risks posed by the American and China race to artificial intelligence, I don't agree entirely with their solutions. And once again, thank you to Here.now for sponsoring this video. I'm going to drop a link to them down below. Give your agent the instructions. It is so easy. Go check them out. They've been a fantastic partner. And I already have a strong opinion on what the solution is, and it is not restricting open source. In fact, check out my exact thoughts in this video right here.